What up, Fightful fam, and welcome to 1-2 Punch. Player 1, Shakiel Mahjouri. Player 2, it's the fantastic Scott Fontana. Not Fantana for all you scrubs out there, of the New York Post Sports. Scott, how's it going, my man?
It's going well, Shaq. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you for making the time today. I know we've been talking about this for a little while, and what better time to get you on board than UFC 261 triple headliner. How are you feeling about it?
Hey, it's great. Honestly, I feel fortunate that it was this week because I watched your show last week and I had no interest in the Triller fight, and I wouldn't have been interested in talking about it. So I'm glad we have this one to talk about.
Yeah, the thing with the Jake Paul Ben Askren fight is I've long been a proponent that, like, look, I like a good filet mignon, but I'm down to pig out at McDonald's. But there's something as eating too much fast food, and I think in the aftermath of that Triller card, I've had my fix. I'm mostly just feeling ill at this point. So let's talk about some real fighting, some UFC. Let me hit that animated intro. Fancy stuff. Welcome, guys, to 1-2 Punch. If you're a longtime viewer of the show, thank you as always for being here. If maybe you hopped over on the Scott Fontana bandwagon, let me tell you how this works. It's news talk, but we operate on a win-lose-draw system. What that means is we're going to assign the week's biggest winners and losers before drawing up a preview for UFC 261. And, hold your horses. When we say winners or losers, we're not trying to crap on anyone. They will beat the living crud out of us. Just to say whose stock went up, whose stock went down. It's all in good fun. If you can, please hit that subscribe button, tap the notification bell, leave a thumbs up on the video. All that goes such a long way to helping us do what we do. If you're feeling extra generous, a super chat donation really goes a long way. We do these for free before every pay-per-view, but if you want to hop on the bandwagon full-time, head over to FightfulSelect.com. That is our Patreon. Ton of pro wrestling coverage, plus this podcast every week. Scott, I am done shilling. Let's get to the action. First and foremost, we're going to get to UFC 261. I think it's going to dominate the conversation a bit, but this is one that I found just super amusing. A report comes out that Conor McGregor is planning on purchasing the pub he famously punched an old geezer in. What do you make of this move? Is this business, or is this just someone with a lot of money flexing?
Well, I had thought it was an old geezer too, and then I read the story this week, and apparently the guy's only 50 years old, so that makes me feel terrible for everyone who's like, I thought he was really old too, but
Yeah.
50 ain't that bad. I'm closer to that than I'd like to be, but yeah, it's such a weird flex. Like, why? What are you doing here? I know he's investing in businesses and things like that, but is this the one? Is this the look that we're going for? I don't
Yes, sir. Sorry, I lost you there for 1 second. Insanity. It's so much. It's so funny. And while he didn't explicitly state that that's true, he did put a tweet out there retweeting the report and saying basically, "Ye man's not permitted." I love this. And to follow up with all these business moves he's potentially making in the football world as well, soccer for those of you in North America, it's amusing to see. And this is the heel Conor that I really like. And we talked a little bit about it surrounding the Dustin Poirier fight and the sort of Good Fight Foundation kerfuffle. What for you is optimal McGregor? Because there's like nice guy McGregor that's kind of down here for me. There's racist, throwing dollies through buses Conor that's here, and there's like a sweet spot where he's like brash and confident and a little mean, but it's kind of funny. Do you think we are getting back to sort of the pre-Jose Aldo Conor McGregor?
I don't know if it's gonna last. I think he just puts on a hat at any given time, and realistically, I think he's always who he is. I think even before the Aldo stuff, there was a lot of playing a character kind of thing. I think he's always playing a version of himself, but there's always truth in there. And I'll tell you, the one thing I don't like is uh dancing around some racist comments, Connor. That is not what I appreciate in my Conor McGregor. He's not my favorite personality to begin with, but if I was to say a version of him who I like best, yeah, it's probably that brash version that we had in the lead up to Jose Aldo. That was at least more fun. And lately it's gotten just too screwy.
Yeah, I hope we level out a little bit. I think Dustin Poirier can be the right foil where, he can get a little competitive in there. He's a top fighter in the world, but not someone who's gonna throw too many low blows. Let's segue a bit. And I know that I said I didn't want to talk about the Paul brothers anymore, but there is an update. It was weird because Floyd Mayweather, 50-0 pro boxer versus Logan Paul, 0-1 pro boxer, without a doubt the lesser of the two Paul brothers in the boxing realm at least, were supposed to fight in an exhibition bout. It got sort of indefinitely postponed, and rumors were going around that the pre-sales weren't too strong, and perhaps that had something to do with it. That was always kind of odd to me because I don't think there's a big discrepancy between fight fans who are purchasing the, Paul cards and then Logan Paul, Jake Paul fans that are purchasing it. And obviously as the media to some degree, we're going to cover it and it's going to be talked about a lot, but that's not where a lot of the money is being generated. It's coming from that sort of younger YouTube audience. So I thought the pre-sales were never something to worry about. Pay-per-view is a day of business anyway. But how much do you think the web traffic, the online chatter, the reported pay-per-view buys, and just Jake Paul winning had to do with sort of accelerating this Mayweather-Logan fight? Because we went from not having a date to suddenly having it come up on June 5th.
It had to have everything to do with it. I mean, the timing of it itself is just such a strong indicator. Like, we didn't hear about this last week. We didn't hear about it 2 weeks ago. We're hearing about it right now in the wake of all those things you just mentioned. It's the time to strike. I mean, Jake Paul and Logan Paul, if you're someone like me who actually doesn't really follow a lot of these YouTube personalities, I hear about them because it's, my job now to get these guys who are in boxing. But I couldn't tell you what makes Jake Paul different from Logan Paul. That's just kind of where I'm at. So if you want to take advantage of people who know even less than me and they just hear Paul brother, oh, that guy sounds like he's interesting to watch, you can kind of just get some rub that way.
Yeah, and I think for me, this is, and you're right, there's a lot of confusion. I think when I hear people outside of the bubble talk about it, they're still never sure who's Floyd fighting. Is it Jake Paul? Is it Logan Paul? Is it Jake Logan? Is it Logan Jake? There's a lot of confusion there, and so I think you're right. There's, to some degree, you can just kind of aggregate the Paul brothers together. With Ben Askren versus Jake Paul, there was a lot of, even myself, originally I had been siding with Jake Paul. The closer we got to the fight, I sort of started leaning towards Ben Askren. We saw how big of a mistake that was. Possibly a really big, there's going to be a very big weight discrepancy between Logan Paul and Floyd Mayweather. But how relieved are you, in a sense, if at all, to finally see a Paul brother? I know it's not Jake, but to see any Paul brother get in there with a legitimate boxer. And we're talking about not just a legitimate boxer, one of the greatest of all times and one of the best, if not the best, defensive boxer of all time. Like, Logan Paul has no chance on earth. And aren't you kind of relieved to see that?
I mean, I guess I am. I'll say that because in the lead up to last week, I didn't watch. First off, I actually just kind of skipped it and just took highlights end up on Twitter pretty soon after, so I saw what I needed. But I am interested to see one of them just kind of take it and just be done with it, because Floyd, yeah, he's not going to lose. But also at the same time, every time Floyd Mayweather has a fight and it's built up and it's hyped and everything like that, it never ends up being that interesting to the average boxing fan, the one who just tunes in because it's a big one. And they forget, oh yeah, Floyd Mayweather, he's a defensive genius, which isn't necessarily aesthetically pleasing. Now, he could probably loosen up against Logan Paul, just like he did against Conor, when everyone thought, oh, Conor had a chance in that fight. I think we all know what was happening there, right?
I think there's a general cry from the MMA community to just let that. It's hard because you don't want to stifle a payday. If Ben Askren wants to go make $500,000 on 1-2 minute fight, more power to him. At the same time, for people like you and I, while we're not the ones getting in there, so I don't think we should have as much of a say. Our opinions don't really matter in that sense. I hate that I have to now go this extra mile to defend MMA fighters from people who don't understand the difference between individual combat sports. If another UFC fighter is going to get in there with Jake Paul, who thus far is at least shown to be capable to a certain degree, what caliber of UFC fighter will it take to actually beat Jake Paul? Because it's not the Ben Askrens of the world, but we know there's a big difference between MMA boxing and regular boxing. But in your mind, is like Tyron Woodley someone who's a good enough MMA boxer to beat someone like Jake Paul in a boxing match?
I think it takes a veteran striker. It just somebody who has been doing some form of boxing, even Thai boxing training for years. Because let's face it, Jake Paul is not an old man, and he's still very young in his career. We can call it a career. He's 3-0, right? And he's kind of at the same stage that a lot of prospect boxers are at. They take fights against kind of, cans, young guys with losses and things like that. Not usually Nate Robinson, who's never put on gloves before, but it's the same kind of territory. So I think it really doesn't take much more than just someone who's been fighting mixed martial arts as a competent to, solid striker for a while.
Mhm.
That to me, I think Tyron Woodley certainly qualifies for that.
Okay, fair enough. And to move on from this, thank goodness, I do want to touch on Jorge Masvidal briefly. We're going to get to the UFC 261 stuff at the tail end, but smart businessman, he announces on Friday, right before the press conference, good timing on his part, that he and Anuel, I don't know if it's AA, just but him and Puerto Rican rapper singer Anuel are starting a MMA bare knuckle fight promotion. First event's going to be held in Miami. I think it's on June 25th, if I'm not mistaken. And it will be under the Game Bred Fighting Championships banner, if I'm not mistaken. I think that's what it's going by.
I believe that's right.
Weird, unexpected. It makes sense for Jorge Masvidal and his brand. I don't know the ins and outs of the business model, but it at least appears that BKFC has been a little bit of a sleeper hit. There seems to be enough of an audience for that. Do you think that something like bare knuckle MMA with Jorge at the helm and someone like Anuel, who's got a massive following, I think like 3 million followers on Twitter alone, do you think that's enough to make something sustainable here?
I think it depends on the type of people they can bring in to actually feed that, because at the very least, bare knuckle has brought in some interesting characters from other sports. They brought in Paulie Malignaggi to go against Artem Lobov, and these are guys who've, been characters, or, in some cases, Paulie Malignaggi is a solid, he had a solid career in the ring. Artem did well on The Ultimate Fighter, and, he acquitted himself well enough in the UFC before leaving. But you need the right guys, and it's not just Jorge being there at the top. You need the people in the cage, the people that people are going to watch. And it depends kind of where it's going to be. You're always going to find an audience. I think there's always going to be the people on Twitter who, are very obsessed with MMA, and they'll watch it in any way they can. But can they expand from that? I think they need more people to bring more eyeballs from bigger outlets. You know what I mean?
I agree, and I do think it probably helps to have someone like Jorge involved, who has a lot of connections in the fight game, is part of a big camp in American Top Team, where you can perhaps draw some of that. I do wonder where... Do you think there's an appetite for this from like a coach's perspective? Like, do you think let's say someone at American Top Team, Dan Lambert, for example, do you think he'll want to get his up and coming fighters involved in something like bare knuckle MMA? Is there a degree of, there's still some degree of a freak show element to it. I know that BKFC is kind of legitimizing themselves. They have likes of Paige Van Zandt, Pearl Gonzalez, who, although may not be super high tier like UFC fighters, they don't have this reputation as that bare knuckle is originally sort of associated with, like old veterans, bloody, tough men. Like, they at least are involving fighters who stray away from the stereotype of what bare knuckle is. Do you think there's going to be an interest from legitimate fight camps to get involved with something like this?
Well, the one thing that jumps to mind is it probably is a better way to get young fighters exposed, like fighters who are not at those levels that we're already hearing about. It's kind of a fast track to getting some, especially if you can get on that first card. You'll get at least a little bit more attention there than you would on, probably even a Cage Fury card. As much as Cage Fury puts on nice fights I'm in New Jersey, so this kind of our region of the MMA landscape, and yeah, it probably has a little bit of a different exposure there, again, on that first card. So I think from a coach's standpoint, it doesn't seem like it's going to be that much different competitively. So it's really just a matter of, are they comfortable getting punched in the face without gloves on? Probably.
Yeah, I do wonder what the recovery time is like. For me, it's the hand braking that's always a concern. because you don't want people out too long. But it'll be interesting to see. I'm always up for diversifying combat sports, having more options out there for the fighters, so it's all good. Now, we do have a fight tonight. Bellator is taking about 2 weeks off, which primes PFL for its big return. I'll let you kind of take the lead on this one. How are you feeling about PFL's first card back and what feels like ages, and especially headlining with Anthony Showtime Pettis?
PFL, I think, is very interesting to me because they do have this model that I think it's more sustainable than I think a lot of people want to give credit for. They really do have a lot of investors that are being patient with it, and the people who are in charge of it are very patient with what they're trying to do to create this thing that is sustainable. I like it because it is a very clear path to that championship. I'm a little frustrated with the fact that we're not getting the fights we're supposed to be getting in the UFC. Now we have guys like, let's say Anthony Pettis thinks he wants to get the championship. He wants to win the $1 million. He wants to be the champion. It's in his hands. It's entirely in his hands. And it doesn't matter if he wins. Like if he wins 4 fights in a row, he's the champion. That's all he's got to do, win 4 fights in a row. In the UFC, you could win 9 fights in a row and not fight for the title. Yeah. Doesn't matter who you fight. It depends on, a lot of factors here. So I like that model. It's interesting to me. They do need to continue to build on that, get more stars, get more people involved. But, putting on another season right here, they have a chance to show more people that, hey, we're not going anywhere. And they haven't. They've paid millions of dollars to these people, and they're still doing it. So there's no doubts about that.
I was watching Morning Combat right before this, and Luke Thomas made an apt point, which is, have you met a fighter or heard of a fighter with a bigger disparity between how much they're making and how well people know them than Lance Palmer? Because Lance Palmer is the kind of guy that you, even as a regular fight fan, you probably couldn't pick out of a crowd, yet he has won 2 consecutive $1 million tournaments and is now, fighting, I think it's Marcin Held, if I'm not mistaken, for a potential 3rd crack at $1 million. Like, not everyone's going to win that tournament, but if you're good enough, man, talk about making a killing here. Because you got guys like Rory McDonald, Antonio Carlos Jr., Tom Lawler, who I'm not giving a whole lot of upside to just based on the fact that he's been splitting his time between pro wrestling so much. But Gleison Tebow, there are a number of fighters who never got in the UFC what they probably should have, especially in Rory McDonald's case, who now have a chance to just cash in big.
I'll tell you someone who actually, you're naming a bunch of guys who didn't really get their opportunities in the UFC. Alexei Konchenko at welterweight, he was a hard luck cut because he lost a couple decisions when I was watching it, I realistically thought he won those fights. So for him to be cut loose, all he has to do is win 2 fights, essentially. If you win 2 fights in PFL, you're typically going to be in that top 4 range. So it doesn't matter if you win by decision or you get 6 points if you win a first round finish. You get 3 points if you just get the win in the decision, right? If you win 2, you're already in the semifinals. And he's someone that interests me too. I do think it's nice that this is the opportunity for people like that who, maybe they're not the sexiest name. You're naming Lance Palmer. No one, like you said, not many people really know him. Nathan Schultz, I think a lot of people they're not familiar with him as well, but he's the 2-time defending champion that Anthony Pettis is going to have to go through. So I like that. It just really excites me that there are opportunities for guys to, even if they're not as well known. I'm very much about sport and MMA. I like the spectacle too, but really I like it when it's about deciding who's the best. And, while we won't decide who's the best in the world in any of these, we'll decide who's the best among this group and they'll get rewarded for it.
Yeah, I love that this is happening. I think 2021 is primed to be a really big year for promotions outside of the UFC. And, I'm under no impression that PFL, One Championship, Bellator are ever going to come close to sniffing the level of the UFC in terms of, the overall depth of roster, the viewership numbers. But what's really important to me is if we are not going, and maybe we will with this class action lawsuit, but if we're not close to seeing UFC fighters compensated fairly. At the very least, what I want to see are platforms where these guys can go to smaller promotions and make money that they deserve. And that's something that, I talked to Antonio Carlos Jr. a few weeks back. That was huge for him. Like, I'm under no impression that Bellator or PFL will ever be as big as the UFC, but I think they can get to a point where they can pay enough of these top guys enough money to have people at least more willing to test free agency and where their services are most needed. And I think that's, well, the prelim guys on Bellator are also getting paid jack. At least we're trending in a direction where there are more options for a larger percentage of fighters.
Absolutely. I like it too. I think the more options for fighters, the better. They need to be able to maximize their value. Unfortunately, they don't know how to do that in some sort of organized way, but at the very least, there are systems out there like this that are making it a little easier for them to play their value somewhere else. And it'll help individuals, but over time, it'll help everybody.
All right. Are there any other winners of the week you'd like to highlight before we move on? Unfortunately for them, to the losers.
I think the biggest winner of the week for me was John Lineker, who looked awesome on Wednesday night when he got that first round KO. I mean, was it a KO? I don't remember if it was a straight on KO, but I mean, it doesn't make the difference. He looked awesome. Same old John Lineker, hands of stone, beating the body and then finishing him off. I'm interested to see if he fights Bibiano Fernandez next. I like that fight.
Oh, that'd be such a good fight. Shout out to Bibiano who trains regularly out here in Vancouver. I am also interested in seeing Eddie Alvarez get another chance next week. I'm glad that they figured out something for him. That's good to hear. A little, I don't want to say disturbing, but a little disturbing that he's basically going to fight someone who went 3 hard rounds just this past Wednesday next week. That's a little shady to me, but what are you going to do, right?
It's fight game.
That's one championship for you.
These things happen in MMA.
Yeah, they do. But at least we got to see Eddie Alvarez back. So That's that. Okay, guys, let's move on to the losers section. Quick reminder, subscribe, tap the notification bell, leave a thumbs up on the video. All small acts that go a long way. Got a bunch of really fun content you can check out over at the channel. UFC fighters reacting to street fights. Zane Simon of Bloody Elbow and I recently went through Jorge Masvidal's UFC career and ranked his opponents from best to worst. Lots of sort of out-of-the-box content there. Okay, now let me say, felt really good to have fans back. The crowd was a little icky at the press conference, but nonetheless, I'm thrilled for the atmosphere that it creates. Jorge was having fun, Kamaru was having fun, all well and good. I don't want to be a Debbie Downer here, but I'm gonna be, because people have been talking so positively about having the fans back. I can't help but shake off this concern that and I'm not saying it will, I know the UFC are taking some precautions, but they're not mandating masks. It's obviously going to be a full arena event. What happens if this turns into a super spreader event? If a ton of people come out of this in a week's time, 10 days time, having contracted the thing that's spreading everywhere, what does that do for the UFC's subsequent plans? What does it do for the state of Florida? If you had to predict, and I'm not a health official here, how bad could this get in a worst case scenario? Not saying that it would, but in a worst case scenario.
I think the worst case scenario you'd be talking about from the UFC's perspective is that it starts to scare off commissions. That's what they don't want. They don't want commissions to be like, listen, we can't sanction this. It's not a good look for us. And that's really, I think, all they care about. If for some reason there are thousands of cases of COVID that come out of this and hospitalizations, things like that, I just don't imagine that's that big of a priority for them, because if people are talking about it, then they're talking about the UFC, and hey, it's still press. I don't know. That's kind of how I look at it from their perspective. I don't know how much they really care. If they cared, they wouldn't be doing it. Dana wouldn't be calling out the media for, hey, what's the media that we're putting all these conditions in for, these protocols and the bubbles and things like that. It's like, okay, well, you have Khamzat Chimaev, who had COVID, and you wanted to have him fight several times over the last year. He's a very pivotal part of your Middle East strategy. You need him, and he got COVID, and it's really terrible. Do you want more people getting this? Khabib Nurmagomedov, his father died of this. This is awful. And because he's gone, it's essentially what he's saying is, my father's not here anymore. My mother doesn't want me to fight anymore. I'm not
Mm,
fighting anymore.
yeah.
If that didn't happen, realistically, the man is still fighting and you still have one of your most bankable stars. Now, I look at it as a human perspective. I'm pretty sure they just look at it as the bottom line. And from the bottom line, you don't want to lose people.
Yeah.
So I don't know. They don't change their minds. It is what it is.
Fair enough. I always get amused by the Dana White versus media thing. I don't take it as hard as I think some of my colleagues do. This is just Dana being Dana. What are you going to do? I did find it amusing, though, that for someone who often talks about how he couldn't care less about the media and what they think, he's now twisting the narrative to, oh, I was actually doing it for their sake. Whatever. It is what it is.
Any given day.
Yeah, any given day.
Something.
It's honestly, there's something. I don't want to say admirable, but I kind of like the chaos. If we're playing D&D, I'm a chaotic good or a chaotic neutral kind of guy. So I'm all for the chaos. Okay, next point, and this has become a growing narrative of UFC 261's strawweight title fight between Zhang Weili and Rose Namajunas. The political angle. It's been done to death. Rose coming out with it's better dead than red narrative. Zhang Weili, obviously the UFC's biggest star from China, a country in which she could not and cannot express her political opinions if they do differ from that of the government regime. What I find really weird about it, and I get that Rose is like, oh, you know what, it has nothing to do with Zhang Weili personally, I'm sort of amping myself up for the fight, everyone's my enemy, etc., is that, like, if you're talking about, now I do believe in some degree of like generational trauma where, although Rose has not experienced this, people in her family have, and that's something that she carries close to her heart. But for me, if Zhang Weili isn't someone who's expressly come out and said, hey, I am pro-Chinese government, isn't it weird to take the stance of, hey, my family and my lineage has suffered under a communist regime, and I don't like you because you are currently stuck under a communist regime? And if anything, shouldn't there be more of sort of like a sisterhood there, that, hey, my family experienced something that you might be experiencing right now?
That is one thing that I'm almost lost on, is why there's not some sort of empathy that's
Mm-hmm.
being expressed out of this, because like you're saying, like she does know what the people under that regime would do. I mean, is what can Zhang Weili do? She really can't do anything if she wants to or not, And really, she hasn't kind of made that any part of her platform in the UFC. She's very much just tried to fight. Everything she says in English is, "My name is Zhang Weili. Remember me." And that's basically it. That's all we really hear from her. And I don't see why. The only thing I understand of this is that Rose is just looking for a reason to get up for it. She's looking for
Mm-hmm.
bulletin board material. We see this in other sports. We see it in MMA. I think it's just real or perceived. You put something out there. I don't think she dislikes Wei Lee, but she kind of said what she said and doesn't seem. I don't know how much of the hubbub about this she actually tunes into.
Yeah.
Like, I think we're all talking about it. And then, she gets back to her and she's like, why are we talking about this? Like, I don't think she really is on social media in the same way a lot of people are.
Well,
So
and so here's kind of my problem with it. And while, Rose appears to be a very nice girl, it seems like her and Whaley aren't beefing over this too much. And like you said, the media and the fans are probably making more out of this than either Rose or Whaley are. This is my issue with it. Even if Rose doesn't think much of it, listen, there's a chunk of the UFC audience that isn't the most enlightened, culturally, politically, regardless of what side of what party lines you toe. I could tell from that press conference that there were some racist people there who were feeding off of this narrative that Rose started, and perhaps we as the media are perpetuating it by talking about it so much. But you got to be conscious when you have a platform and you say things, even if it doesn't mean that much to you. There are some bottom feeders out there who are going to hold on to that for dear life. And to see a champion as respectful and as talented as Zhang Weili now have to deal with a portion of the audience who are now leaning into an anti-communist narrative around her, just kind of sucks for Zhang Weili, doesn't it?
I was very concerned just in general, just for, not for her safety or anything like that, but just the fact that there's been a lot of hate crime against,
Mm-hmm.
Asian people
Tell
and
me about it. What a
API
bad time
crime.
to come out with
It's
this.
such a terrible time for it. And I was worried about that being kind of the thing. And we were going to get people chanting at the event, like Chinese virus or something like that. I just don't want to hear any of that. Look, you want to chant USA, that's okay. I don't there's nothing wrong with having pride in your country, but I didn't want it to go there. And now, of course, we have this other narrative. But to go back to kind of how Rose comes into us and whether she should know better, maybe, or something like that. These people aren't media trained.
Yeah.
None of these fighters are media trained. And that's part of that is just because it's not a priority. But I think it's also in part by design, because you'll get fighters who will say things that are very interesting and it draws eyeballs. And it doesn't matter. Like I said before, it doesn't matter what the pub is. You're still talking about them. And,
Yeah.
someone like the New York Mets, they don't want that negative attention on them because they have this brand and everything. They've been around and they really want to keep a positive thing because there's so many sponsors and things. The UFC doesn't concern themselves with that because the sponsors that have come over there, they know what they're signing up for.
Yeah. All right, last thing on the losers, and this is not so much about our UFC welterweight champion Kamaru Usman, so much as it is for me as a fan. But you had him coming out and saying that, hey, you know what? I'm starting to lap people at this point, and I don't know how much longer I'll be doing it. So basically, kind of going the Habib route and teasing an impending retirement. I don't think we should be that concerned right now. I don't think it's as serious as perhaps the headlines are leading people to believe. But not only would that suck, because I think Kamaru Usman is on his way. He's not there, but he's on his way to challenging George St. Pierre for that all-time GOAT welterweight status. But it's just not true. Like, there are interesting matchups still. He hasn't fought Leon Edwards. The rematch between Colby Covington, there's a huge appetite for. You've got Stephen Wonderboy, who's, Stephen Wonderboy, if he beats Gilbert Burns, he should be there. You have Vicente Luque, who is probably one fight away from contention. You have Michael Chiesa, who really deserves a top fight. And hey, if Nate Diaz somehow beats Leon Edwards, well, that's the fight to make from a money perspective. Like, what do you mean there's no one else? There's so many people for you to fight right now.
Well, he did beat Leon very early in their careers. That was,
Yeah,
I believe,
but
his second fight. It's been a long time,
and
of course.
even
I think
Kamaru has admitted that he has improved leaps and bounds. That was my toughest fights, and that he does deserve a rematch.
Yeah, absolutely. The one thing that when I spoke to Kamaru earlier this week, I did ask him kind of about some of these other contenders who haven't had a crack at him before. The Luques, Wonder Boy, and Chiesa as well. He did perk up about the idea of fighting Luque, who he considers to be a good friend, a former training partner. He really likes what he's been doing. He respects what he's the win he had over Tyron Woodley. And I imagine that if anybody of kind of that group who's never been in the cage with him before, I think you'd probably see Luque maybe get elevated. He may need another win. I don't know, but he at least has the champ's attention. One thing he did say though is he is not very interested in the Wonder Boy fight.
Poor Wonder
Basically,
Boy.
yeah, he's dismissing Wonder Boy as, you already fought twice for the title. You couldn't beat Tyron Woodley. Why should you get another shot again? Especially when he has not had the most active schedule in recent years. And I think that's a lot of the beef that he has is how active he's been and Wonder Boy has not been.
Ah, man. One poor Wonder Boy gets so much slack, and it's not deserved. Like, he's bounced back in such a strong way. He was winning that Anthony Pettis fight until he got hit with a very unique shot. He's beat Vicente Luque. I was there, UFC 240. Were you there? I'm sure you must have been there, 244.
No, which one was that? What year was that?
Masvidal Diaz.
No, I was not there that year.
Oh, you're so close, man. You're
I know, I missed
far. I
it.
wish I'd seen you there.
I missed that one.
But yeah, he's
I
got
thought the other ones at the Garden.
Yeah, he's got the Vicente Luque win there, and I don't think you can deny him if he beats Gilbert Burns. Like, Gilbert Burns, despite not lasting too long against Usman, had him hurt in that first round. I'd argue second toughest fight Usman has had in recent years, behind the Colby Covington one. What do you make of the sentiment that this is a design in which Stephen Wonderboy Thompson is not undeserving, but just too low reward, high risk for anyone? Because that has been a narrative around Wonderboy, that you just never look good when you beat him.
I think that's another part of that too. The other thing Kamaru mentioned about Wonderboy was just if he was going to take a fight, and there's some posturing here. If I'm going to take a fight like that, I'm going to need to be compensated. That was his word. So it sounds like what he is doing is saying, yeah, I'll take that fight. I'll take any fight. You just got to pay me enough.
I love that more and more fighters at a high level are just bringing up the conversation of getting paid adequately. Rising, what is it, something, rising tide lifts all boats or something
Lifts
like
all
that.
boats.
Perfect. Look at me and my like, I consume way more American television than like these phrases are not often ones that are like around my regular day life, and so I always confuse them. I'll say something like egg on my face, and people look at me like, "What on earth are you talking about?"
Yeah, we don't say that here.
Yeah, there we go. Okay, let me see. I think that about does it for the losers. Is there anyone else that? Oh, actually, no. There is one more that I almost forgot. We'll do a 2-in-1 package here because I don't want to go too long on it. But sad for us as fight fans. UFC president Dana White comes out and says that, hey, it's looking like it's going to be Francis Ngannou, Derek Lewis 2, a rematch in a highly anticipated rematch of arguably the worst heavyweight fight in UFC history, if not the worst fight, period. And that Marvin Vettori is likely getting the next title shot against Israel Adesanya due to timeline issues with Izzy and Robert Whittaker. Quick thoughts?
I don't like that it's Vettori next. Not that I dislike Vettori or think he's unworthy, but I think we saw Robert Whittaker prove that he was worthy, and that if they want to, they're saying timeline. Okay, fine. But I'd rather see that fight than the Vettori fight. I think it's going to be more fun regardless. So whether win, lose, or draw, it's going to be more fun. Vettori's fights, realistically, they're not always the most aesthetically pleasing. Talk about aesthetically pleasing or not. You mentioned obviously Ngannou and Lewis too. That one, like you said, it was terrible, but it's got nowhere to go but up at the very least.
Yeah,
It can only be better
be
than that. I think it really will be better, not just because of by default. We do want to see John Jones next, but realistically, Derek Lewis is the heavyweight, the active heavyweight that makes the most sense to fight him. So it's hard to get drastically mad about it from a competitive standpoint, a sports standpoint, but John Jones should be next. It's the fight to make. The UFC is supposed to make the fights we want, make the fight.
Yeah, I will say there's something admiring about Derek Lewis in which no matter how far you think he sinks, he always finds a way to get back to that upper echelon title contention status. So I love that for him. If it's got to go to someone on a personal level, very happy for Derek Lewis. But like I said, not the right fight. Plus, I don't know how much of this is. I get it sounds like a lot of this is the UFC, and we've seen it based on their very compelling pay-per-view schedule, really just trying to pump out big fight after big fight. I don't know if there's an issue regarding how soon they can get Whittaker versus Adesanya to the Oceanic region. I feel like that's probably a part of it that isn't being talked about enough. I don't quite know what New Zealand and Australia are at right now in terms of letting people from other countries in. It's a really
I would bet New Zealand has zero interest. It sounds like it's very hard to get to and from there.
So that might have something to do with it, but I really would like to see Whittaker get that fight. Okay, well, let's move on very quickly to UFC 261. We'll go for like 5 or 6 minutes. I don't want to keep you here too long. Okay, is this Jorge Masvidal's last shot? He's up there in age. While he was relatively deserving of that first title shot, let's be honest, it was one, right place, right time in terms of the short notice appearance, and two, star power. Star power takes you so far in the sport. If he can't beat Kamaru Usman, do you see him getting a title shot ever again?
In the UFC, no. He has to beat Kamaru Usman unless Usman is to lose his next fight, and let's say it's Colby Covington, and then they want to put together Covington Masvidal for a title. It's going to take someone getting Usman out of the way. They're not going to give a third Usman Masvidal fight a chance because we won't buy it. I don't think we will.
Yeah, and I don't foresee Usman losing that title for quite a while.
I'm with you.
Next up, Valentina Shevchenko. Where does she go with a win from here? For me, Jessica Andrade, I know for a lot of other people, is like the most compelling Shevchenko fight we have had in ages. It's someone who you can actually believe, if not beat Valentina, put up an interesting fight. We're talking about someone like Lauren Murphy next. Lauren Murphy, if she wins her next fight, very much deserving of that opportunity, but I think all anyone wants to see at this point is Valentina versus Amanda 3. What would you do with Valentina Shevchenko if she beats Jessica Andrade impressively?
I think if you asked Valentina, her goal would be to fight more flyweights. When I spoke to her this week, I asked her a little bit more about, are you interested in a fight with Amanda Nunes? And she's kind of the mind that if the opportunity comes up, she would take it, but it's not something she's chasing or pushing for. Seems like she's mentally moved on from that, and she feels ownership of this flyweight class as being her division, the one that was always right for her. And she couldn't really compete in because if she wanted to get to the UFC at the time, she had to fight at bantamweight, she had to fight up. And she seems to feel very protective of the fact that this is enough. You don't
Yeah.
need more than this. I'm good with it. In kind of the same way Khabib was okay with 155 pounds.
And you love to see it. I think the double champ thing, the champ versus champ thing, it's fun, but as much as Israel Adesanya is one of my favorite fighters, for the sake of the middleweight division, I think it's best that he lost that Jan Blachowicz fight. And it does nothing. Like you when you really think about it, like Conor McGregor, two division champion, obviously huge from a fan favorite aspect, but do we consider him among the best of the best of the best? No, because he never even successfully defended a title, right? We think about the Anderson Silvas, the George St. Pierre's. Now we're leaning into the Valentina Shevchenkos, Amanda Nunes's,
Maru Usman.
Kamar Usmans, who have built a legacy in one division. Like that goes a way longer way for you in terms of your long-term reputation, success in the sport, than this whole jumping up and down the ladder thing. And look, if it makes sense, there was a time where like Anderson Silva versus George St. Pierre made all the sense in the world. More often than not, these things don't make sense. So I love that there are people like Valentina Shevchenko out there who are happy to just be the greatest flyweight of all time. And dude, you think of people like, Amanda Nunes is the rare exception who's managed to succeed in both divisions. But I can't think of a champ who's sniffing the GOAT conversation. Isn't that weird?
I mean, I can't either, but I think part of that is just because the wrong people kind of got there. Daniel Cormier, amazing fighter, fantastic fighter, but he will always be the guy who lost to John Jones those times. It
Yeah.
doesn't matter that they took away one of them. We know what we saw, and we know what we saw the first time too. I think everybody kind of agrees that John Jones is just the better fighter, and that is going to always hurt. If you want to be considered the GOAT, you can't beat the guy that other people are calling the GOAT.
Yeah.
It's not going to work.
100%. Last thing for you, Scott. Personally, which fight do you think has the biggest stakes, the most important title implications between Usman Masvidal to Rose versus Weili and Shevchenko Andrade?
I think it's definitely got to be the welterweight fight because we're talking about a chance for Masvidal to really take himself to the next level as potentially certified star and not just someone who's chasing the money at this point. And then you've got on the other side, you've got Kamaru Usman, who if he wants to build his legacy, if he wants to be considered one of the greatest of all time, he's got to keep going. He's got a lot more work to do if he's going to catch George St. Pierre, and you can't just keep losing. George St. Pierre lost too. Let's face it, that happened. But, he's got more to lose. If he can keep going, it looks a lot better.
I agree with you. I do want to give a supplemental nod to the strawweight title fight. And it doesn't have anything to do with Zhang Weili or Rose Namajunas. It's just that division as a whole. Like, when you hear the names Joanna, Weili, Rose, Andrade when she was in that division, like, strawweight has carved out this niche of being just one of the most exciting, action-packed divisions at the higher end. And while it's often not the headlining spot on a card, it's often like the hardcore fans' favorite. And I think there's a building appetite for that stuff when you can put it under someone like Masvidal or Conor, where you're exposing a casual audience to just how vicious and fun these women's strawweights are. So I think there's a huge opportunity for them. And I can't think of anyone who said that this is going to be a boring fight.
Oh, heck no, it's going to be fun. My favorite fight of last year was most definitely Zhang and Jacek. And I don't think this can top it. That's too high a bar. But I think it's going to be a lot of fun. Every time Rose gets in there with high-level women, it's just fireworks, and I'm excited for that.
And here we are at the end of our run. Scott, first and foremost, I want to thank you so much for doing this. It's been a lot of fun. I'm glad we finally nailed it down. You got everything here in terms of your graphics, but please let people know where they can find you and all the great work you're doing.
Yeah, you can find my work at nypost.com/sports. You can follow me on Twitter at Scott_Fontana. And I'm close to 1,000 followers. So if you want to give me a couple follows, that'd be fun. I'm okay with that.
Love it. As for me, find me on Twitter at Shaq_Fu, Shaq with a K. You can see it there. You guys know what's up. Please, please, please hit subscribe, tap the notification bell. That goes a long way. The numbers are ticking up. We're starting to, I'm not going to say names, we're starting to slowly surpass some other MMA channels. That's very nice to see. Thank you guys so much for that. If you like this show and you want to catch it every week, the best way you can help us out, go to FightfulSelect.com. That is our Patreon. You'll get the show every week. Small subscription fee. Makes a good impression on the bosses for moi, so thank you for that. Most importantly, enjoy UFC 261. We'll have you covered all week long over at Fightful.com, FightfulMMA.com. Time for that terrible, terrible outro of mine. Stay tuned for everything Fightful and so delightful. Peace out.